Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to our Art Toolkit demo series. I'm Maria Coriel Martin, founder of Art Toolkit, and I'm so excited to be here today in person at our Art Toolkit shop, our first live demo live stream from here with Julie Beeler.
And I'm honored to be here in this amazing place where all this creativity happens. It's great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so excited. And Julie, you're an artist, designer, educator with a deep love and curiosity for the natural world. And you've created this mushroom color atlas, which is just incredibly inspiring and bringing together curiosity, education, creativity, collaboration, community, the environment, and you're here in Port Townsend, not just to visit us, but for the International Fungi and Fiber Symposium.
Yes, we can't forget the fiber part.
So we're really grateful that you're here today and taking time to be with us.
Thank you.
And to share inspiration for creating mushroom pigment watercolors.
Yes.
Which is so cool. This is this whole new world. And as we get going, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat for those of you who are joining us live. So if you've got questions, you can go ahead and let us know. And I'll do my best to relay those to Julie. So Julie, as we get started, can you share a little bit about your background and how you became curious about mushrooms and color?
I sure can. You know, my background is in design, and I spent a lot of time having a design studio over the years and working with color. I also grew up with a grandmother who had a fiber and yarn store and spent a lot of time working with textiles. So I kind of brought my love of textile and fiber and fabric and the world of color and pigments and paint together with the fungi kingdom. And I've always been enamored by the fungi kingdom. And as a little kid, I didn't even know what they really were. I mean, I knew they were mushrooms, but I just probably thought they were a plant. And so later in life, I thought now is the time I'm going to dig in and actually learn about the mycological world. And I was also thinking, I want to kind of elevate my textile work and start to make my own colors and create my own designs and so forth. And I just kind of typed into Google, do mushrooms make color? And sure enough, I learned all about an amazing individual named Miriam Rice, who had published a book that had just been reprinted. And I thought, that's it. And I went down the rabbit hole and haven't really ever come out.
Well, that's amazing. And you have brought, y'all can't quite see this yet, but this just like amazing spread of treasures. They look like treasures to me. And I wonder, Julie, if you might want to hold up and give us a little tour, and then we can switch to our desktop view, and you've got some.
I'd be happy to
share with us.
So what I wanted to show a little bit, and I can put this in the view, is this is one of my textile pieces. This is a mushroom called Phaeolus schwarzenitzi, and this thread is all dyed from the mushroom itself. So this is an amazing mushroom that gives us 4 different colors. And the reason I brought that today, this is the actual mushroom here that I'll show you.
Wait,
but
can I hold this up?
Yes, you can.
There we go.
This is broken off a little bit. But what you can see with this mushroom, this is dried, but you can see the color down in there. And this mushroom can make all these colors. And in addition to it, it can also make a world of pigment. This is really hard to see right there, and I'll show you. But I take it through this process called laking to make pigments, and I can also make ink with it. We can make crayons. I mean, once you have it in pigment form, you can do all sorts of things. So I wanted to show my textile piece because this is really my jumping off point, in which I then, after I dye fibers and fabrics and things, I then create the pigments from that and then incorporate those into my work.
Can you show everyone that pocket palette you brought?
I did. I brought a little pocket palette. I was so excited to get my first little Art Toolkit palette. And this has all the different colors that I'm going to demonstrate today. And it's kind of crazy because the colors don't look different at all. They all look kind of dark brown. But once you get them onto the paper or whatever substrate you're working with, they create a huge array of colors, which I'll demonstrate here today.
And can I just hold up these two and then
Yes,
we'll pull the overhead? I just have, like, Julie showed these to me, that these are all, you'll have to tell me, Julie.
The top one's the
and dyes
pigments.
these were all made from mushrooms. Like,
yes, so you get the whole spectrum. And there is an amazing book by Arlene Bassetti, and the title of it is called The Rainbow Beneath Our Feet. And it talks about dye mushrooms, and it's a foraging guide for dye mushrooms. And I absolutely love that title, because as I walk through the forest and interact with the fungi kingdom, I can't help but think about that rainbow that exists every step as we move.
And that was one of our recent art toolkit recommendations, I believe. We've got that book up in our shop.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Well, maybe we should pull up our desktop, and you
sure
got some things for sharing and demonstrating.
I would be happy to do that. I want to let's see. I'm gonna maybe flip these over real quick.
Keep those. Okay.
Yeah,
so
well, only because I'm going to show some of the pigments.
All right.
So here is some pigment, and I don't know if the color translates well, but this is a Cortinarius mushroom, and it creates these amazing palette of color of these reds. And here I've done some different treatments where I've overlaid the pigments with some different modifiers that affect the pH, and you can see the color change within that pigment range. And those colors come from this amazing little specimen here. This is Cortinarius mushroom. This is a guild mushroom. Maybe I'll just put them down there like that. This is a guild mushroom. You can see the gills underneath it, and it's quite a fun dried little specimen. This is a huge Cortinarius, which, you know, next to my tiny little pigment vial, it doesn't look that big, but, you know, most that we find are half that size. So when we're thinking about pigments from mushrooms and we're out foraging, you know, it can often take, you know, a few handfuls of these, and that might take a couple years to come by. So these pigments are incredibly precious to me. I showed you the dyer's polypore, this mushroom here, and this makes this amazing mustard color, and you can see those yellows underneath. And what's unique about this mushroom is this is a polypore. The underside of it is very different than that guild mushroom. And so in the mycological world, we are thinking about how we can identify these mushrooms. And one of the main ways that we think about that is we look at the underside.
Hang on one sec. I think we need to get our, thanks for letting me know, MR Cohen, let me get our overhead.
Oh, was it not on?
It came up here. Let's see. This should come up.
Is it not pinned or something?
Yeah.
Something strange.
Okay. We will get this figured out. Why isn't
and I can start over too.
Yeah, here we go. Let's try this.
I'd be happy. I get a second take at it.
That is so odd. Let's see. Why isn't bringing up our overhead?
Maybe it's something with YouTube. Oh
no, it's on. Thanks for hanging tight. And why? Okay,
so can you guys see it now?
We've got,
oh, good. It's on. People are saying they can see it. Okay.
Hang on one second.
It's right there. They're saying we can see it.
But I think it's coming and going. It's on a speaker view. So we'll try gallery. And then I was hoping we can just pin. So
okay, it looks pinned.
Thank you for your patience, everybody.
Now it's gone again. So when we went to gallery view, it goes off. But if we go to speaker view,
yeah. And
oh, you know what I've had to do before? You have to make it the focus. I think if you take it off gallery view and go to speaker view.
Okay, so now we've got both on there. So I was hoping not to have our faces in the screen, but maybe we'll play it safe and keep it as a split screen. I'm going to give this one more take at pinning it. So
yeah, let us know if it's there.
Yeah, but we'll take the split screen if that works. So let's
okay. Hopefully we're good to go,
everyone. Oh gee, there it goes again. Let's try one more thing. Okay, so we're
it's
split
off
screen
now.
again.
I think if you take it off split screen, it'll work.
Okay.
If you just go to gallery or speaker view.
Why don't we keep it as a split screen?
Okay, keep it as a split.
Okay. Whew. Thanks. We're gonna keep it as a split screen. So
you'll get to see the side of my head here. I'll move in.
Yes, thank you for your patience, everybody. New location, always a little
technology.
Thank you,
it's a good thing we worked with, wild pigments and things.
Yes. Okay, so you're gonna show us.
So I'll start over. So
and I just gotta say, these Latin names just like roll off your tongue. Observed in the chat. And
so what I wanted to show, so it might be hard to see the color here, but this is pigment from Cortinarius, which is this mushroom here. And this is a small gilled mushroom. You can see from underneath, it's got gills, and it makes these beautiful array of colors. And I've applied some overlays, some modifiers that affect the pH of this mushroom pigment. And so you can see the subtle changes in it. But you can see this is a really huge mushroom here for Cortinarius. Usually they're a half to a quarter of this size. But these precious pigments, it can take, sometimes you can find as much as you need in a year. Sometimes it takes a couple of years, but that is a Cortinarius. And then this is the Phaeola schweitzenitzi that I showed earlier. And it makes this kind of beautiful mustard golden color. And what's unique about this mushroom is it is actually a polypore. So there aren't any gills under it. So it's very different than the Cortinarius mushroom. You can also see it's rather large and huge. This is the Dyer's polypore. And in the mycological world, we're often using all of our senses and to identify mushrooms. And one of the things we look at a lot is the underside. And we think about what kind of mushroom is it? Is it a gilled mushroom? Is it a polypore? And in this case, this mushroom here is what we call a tooth fungi. It has these subtle teeth here. And Maria held this thing earlier, and it's like a hunk of wood. And this is a really unique mushroom that grows in the Pacific Northwest, where Maria and I are. It's called Echinodontium tinctorium, and it's the Indian paint fungus. And it makes just these beautiful dark reds and so forth, and oranges. And it is that well-known paint that you would see indigenous people might wear for symbolic or aesthetic purposes, but it was also used to, help heal sunburns or to, help keep you from getting sunburned or heal insect bites and so forth. Here's some of the pigment that it makes. And the reason I love showing this specimen is I don't know how many of you know what this white webbing is that's coming up through this mushroom, but that is mycelium. And mycelium is very, very unique. It's the roots of the fungus. And when we think about that web that's below our feet, we're thinking about that mycelium that connects the fungi to, the plant kingdom and to trees and so forth. And this is just such a beautiful illustration of it. When we're out foraging, we want to think about the soil and the habitat and the mycelium there. And we want to make sure to have as minimal disturbance to that soil as possible. So when we think about ethical foraging, those are some of the things we're thinking about, is to protect that mycelium. I always say, mushrooms, they're a fruit of the fungi, right? Similar to an apple. The apple is the fruit of a tree. Now, to collect apples, you don't go cut a branch off the apple, and you sure don't cut the tree down. And if we were to destroy the mycelium that's in the soil as we go foraging, it's in essence like you're cutting the limb off of a tree. So we want to really protect that habitat.
Julie, I've got a question about just with the colors you've created and mushrooms you've collected. I know collectors don't give away their spots, but are these all Pacific Northwest based, or have you been doing some traveling to other regions to go foraging for specific colors and mushrooms?
I haven't traveled to a lot of different regions. I was just back in the Northeast in Vermont and traveled to collect some different specimens there. A couple of them have been gifted to me from Scandinavian countries, and some from friends that are down in California with species that grow there, but not here. Or sorry, it's more varieties that grow there and don't grow here. So they aren't all specifically from the Pacific Northwest, but what I'm showing you today is these mushrooms can all be found here. This mushroom I have, this is a dried lobster mushroom. So I don't know how many people who are listening actually go foraging, but the lobster mushroom is an edible that people love to eat. I actually don't eat it because look at what it creates. These colors are beautiful. But more importantly, the lobsters that I like to forage and find are nothing anyone wants to eat. They are usually rotted out and disgusting, and you wouldn't want to put it in your mouth. And I don't know if you can see this one. This has some white in it. Those are actually the spores that have released from this mushroom. So oftentimes I'm wanting to pick them in a more mature state where I know that they have sporulated. They've released their spores, and then that helps along with the not disturbing the mycelium to ensure that they will return, when the conditions in the environment are such that they'll come. So that's a great example of that one there. And my last little mushroom I'll show you. I'm going to demonstrate some paint from this type of mushroom called a tooth fungi. I don't actually have this pigment here, but this is Hydnellum suaveolens, and you can kind of see the teeth down here. So this is a tooth fungus, but it sure looks very different than this mushroom. So this grows on the sides of trees, the Indian paint fungus, and then the Hydnellum suaveolens grows up out of the soil. But it often produces these kind of dark purpley blues of pigment. And I've got a couple today in that family, Hydnellum regium and Hydnellum pecci, that I will show. So that is an overview of mushrooms and the variety of pigments you can get. What I do is I make what I call a dye bath, and I'm going to illustrate that here in a second. There are certain mushrooms that lend themselves very, very well to making ink. Now, ink is soluble, right? This is Physolithus tinctorius. It's this huge puffball, and it's impossible to make a pigment from it. It just does not. The chemistry behind this mushroom, which I wish I was a chemist, I can't exactly explain it to you, but I've worked with it enough to know that you just can't lake it and turn it into this insoluble pigment. So Physolithus, along with, a few others are things that we work with in liquid form, and I'll demonstrate that today. But most of the time what I'm doing is I am working with a dye bath. So this is colored water where I've extracted the color from the phyolus that we have here. And it's kind of a yellowy amber color, I think, for lack of a better description. I'm just going to move that there super quick, if that's okay. And what I do is when I'm working with this dye bath, first and foremost, I often dye fiber and fabric in this before I make pigment. They're very precious, all my little mushrooms, and I want to extract every last bit of color and pigment that I can from them. So I use them first to dye my fiber and fabric, and then I have this leftover dye bath. And, Maria can vouch for the fact that there's a lot of color in this. It's not clear liquid. And then I take it through what we call the laking process. And the example I have here is of a strained lake. And this is just the actual pigment as it's dried. I've strained it out in just a little mini coffee filter. In my studio, I use, leftover cotton sheets, or I'll use linen, what have you, to strain. But in some cases, I'll use these paper coffee filters. And here's the pigment. And in order to get it into this form here, which is a nice, more finely ground pigment that you can actually then use to make paint from, I put it into a coffee grinder, and I never grind my coffee in it because it's only, for my dyes. You definitely want to keep your equipment separate. And then I use it in a mortar and pestle to kind of break it down and get it even finer. And the more fine I can get it, it makes transforming it into paint much easier. From this step here, I would then mull my pigments, with a glass plate and a muller. I'd add my binder, whatever binder that I'm interested in based on the type of paint I want to make. And I would then create that paint and use it however you want. I actually do put a binder in that allows me to apply this pigment to fiber and to fabric. I also make a lot of watercolors, and I've even experimented with making different wax type crayons and so forth. So I'm going to demonstrate real quick how to make a lake for those that might be interested. And I don't know how well you'll see it, but what we need to do is we need to take this soluble dye bath and we need to transform it into pigment. And by doing that, we are adding two different mineral bases to it. One is aluminum potassium sulfate. And that aluminum potassium sulfate acts as a modifier, it acts as a mordant, wrong term. And it is going to neutralize the dye bath, and it's going to grow those color compounds and make them much larger. So we're going to pour that in. There is a kind of an art to making lakes. I'm just going to stir it around real quick, where you have to consider the ratio of the water, the amount of dye that you have in here, and then you put in a certain ratio of alum. So it's 10 grams per liter of dye bath of alum. And then I want to add the precipitator. And the precipitator in this case is soda ash, and it's very alkaline. And it is now going to precipitate off this pigment. So we'll put it in here, and you'll start to see a chemical reaction, which might be hard to see on the screen, but I know Maria can see it here. It starts to get cloudy.
Yeah, it looks a lot cloudier.
And so what it's going to do, you can see that's the actual pigment, those molecules there, and they're between the alum, the mordant, and the precipitator, the soda ash, they have now grown to be much larger and much heavier. So what's going to happen is it's immediately going to start to sink. I'm going to spill that if I turn it on its side. I'll put the lid back on. It's immediately going to start to sink to the bottom. So it's going to levigate down. And as it levigates down through, it'll take, all the different dyes take different amount of time. Some take 24 hours to levigate, some take just a few hours. But once it all falls to the bottom, the liquid on top, which we call the supernatant, that's going to be clear, mostly clear. And it indicates that you have captured the majority of the color out of there. And that is when you can then strain it, and you're left with this amazing pigment that you can then transform.
Just to recap, Julie.
I know, little science experiment in here.
You had this, you had your mushrooms.
Yep.
And
and I made a dye bath.
You
So
made a dye bath.
I
So is that
coaxed
like
the color.
cooking them, like cooking the
Mhm.
mushrooms in water
Yeah.
for like a day or.
It's similar to kind of making a cup of tea,
Uh-huh.
where you've got warm water, you've got these mushrooms. Oh, sorry, a little jar. Warm water and mushrooms, and you're cook it. I tend to cook things for about an hour,
Uh-huh.
and you can start to see that the color has moved through, and now you've got a colorful dye bath.
And then what you added made everything sort of bigger and heavier. So
Mhm.
then when you put it in the strainer, it captures all that wonderful pigment you're showing.
Exactly. And then that pigment can be transformed into a variety of paints. In this case, this is all watercolor paint here, with the exception of the Pisolithus that's an ink. So yeah, and coaxing color from mushrooms is a whole super exciting thing to do. There's lots of different ways to go about it, and each mushroom needs a little special handling and like what it likes. If it likes a more acidic dye bath or a more alkaline, but you can get this color from the mushrooms. Now, I said I dye my fiber in it first, so this is not 100% pigment straight from the mushroom, because it's dyed this fabric and fiber and created all these glorious colors. And then I've extracted the pigment because I don't want to lose a little ounce of color. If you are like an artist and you have no interest in dyeing any fabric or fiber, you can make this dye bath and then just make a lake right from it. Or you could make an ink. Personally, certain mushrooms do better as inks than others. I'm going to show, this is, oops, hold on just a second. Let me find it here in my pile. Where are you? So this is Pisolithus ink, and this is Pisolithus, or sorry, Phaeolus. Phaeolus ink and Phaeolus paint. This is paint where I modified the dye bath to a pH 9 anyways, before I did it. And this is just straight. And in my opinion, the Phaeolus, the pigment that it makes is much stronger and more powerful than the actual ink. So I'm always going to make a pigment from it personally, but you can make ink. I just happen to like the richer color here.
And Julie, like rookie question here.
Yeah.
Ink versus pigment.
Yep. So ink is something that is soluble. It has not gone through a transformative process to become insoluble. So people work with all kinds of pigments, right? You can work with pigments from soil and from ochres and from botanicals and from, bark and all sorts of things. And you can work with that as an ink and keep it in liquid form, or you can make it insoluble and make a pigment. The pigments are pretty fun because you can transform them with different kinds of binders for all kinds of uses. Ink, yeah, I guess you can a little bit. I don't know. It doesn't seem as have as much variety of uses as an ink. But this Pisolithus, I cannot make a pigment from it to save my life. I've tried at least 8-ish, 10-ish times, and every time it's a complete fail, but it makes the most beautiful ink. So it's a perfect marriage. So now to demonstrate the colors, are there questions? Do you have questions?
Yeah. What are some of the binders that you experiment with?
So for my work on fiber, I use gum tragacanth as a way to thicken the pigments and make paint. For watercolors, I use gum arabic with combined with some glycerin and sometimes with some honey. And that is kind of primarily all I work with. You can add like chalk to this to make everything more opaque, to get kind of more of a gouache-like feel. There are people that work with different resins to make oil paints. I just personally don't do that, but anyways. So what you can see down below, this is a color wheel that I've made from these pigments here. So, again, to show you my palette, look at that. You can't even see the difference in color. They all look like the same kind of brown red, I guess. But once you put them on, they're completely different in their colors. So this is the lobster mushroom that I was showing earlier, and then the Cortinarius. So you can see that range of the more brick red and the more pink. That's Indian paint fungus versus the Pisolithus. These are both Dyer's polypore, the Phaeolus schwetzenitzi. They're just treated a little bit differently before I started working with them. And then here are the tooth fungi, the Hydnellum regium versus the Hydnellum pecci. And Hydnellum pecci is also known as the bleeding tooth mushroom, for anyone that's seen pictures of this beautiful mushroom with this red guttation, we call it. It's mushroom sweat, but it's bright red and it looks like a bleeding tooth. It's other common name is strawberries and cream, but it makes this kind of brown color. So those are the colors there. And now I'm going to get my little palette going. You can stick that there. And I got to get my cheat sheet so I know which is which. And we will start to demonstrate some of these colors here.
Just seems like there's so much experimentation and learning you get to do. And I'm guessing you kept a terrific notebook of your experience.
Yes, yes. And, out of that, I created the Mushroom Color Atlas. Everything I'm talking about is up at the Mushroom Color Atlas for people to see and use, where I've documented my process. I'm just going to paint this over here. So you can see here, this is the Dyer's polypore. Because it's an incredible world of experimentation and play and creativity. But if you've gone out and you've found some mushrooms and you're really curious, like, okay, I've got this mushroom, I'd love to make this kind of color. Does it make this color? How would I make it? The Color Atlas is there for you to kind of work with and help you on your journey. My goal was to get people inspired about learning more about the mycological world and starting to become better stewards of our environment and habitat as we start to learn more about it. So let's see.
In your experiments, was there any mushroom and color that you found most surprising?
Yes, it's kind of a geeky technical response to that. But these little Cortinarius mushrooms that I showed you, this is a huge family of, or species, I should call it, species of mushrooms. And within that species, they've broken them down into different subcategories. And it's the Dermosebe mushroom that makes all these beautiful colors. And here, some of these colors from it. And what was amazing to me is that I would work with them as a dye on fiber and fabric. And I loved the colors that was happening, but the minute I would turn them into pigment, they would turn this kind of shocking red. So there's a certain mushroom in the Cortinarius family where I can really only get it to be orange when I'm working with trying to get it to bind to fiber. But the minute I turned it into a pigment and shifted it, it was red. But I can't get that red on fabric. So like that really, really surprised me, because I thought, whatever I can get on fiber and fabric is what I can get in pigment. And that wasn't the case. So that was super exciting. But yeah, anyways, so you can see this range of colors that we can get from all these guys. So that's the lobster mushroom I was just painting there. I'm going to flip it over here and I'm going to work with another color from the Phaeolus schwetzenitzi, which is, never mind. Forget I said that. I'm seeing what color it's creating now. It's creating red. I'm working with Cortinarius mushroom that I was just talking about. So let's see. Try to get some more.
I'm just amazed by the whole range of colors you can get.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is. You can get every color in the rainbow and every variety therein. I was had the luxury of getting here a little earlier and playing in Maria's retail space, and she's got this cute note of there are over 40 million color combinations. And we were talking about how this computer algorithm.
Our palette combination.
Oh, your palette. Sorry. Palette
more
combinations.
than 40 million.
Yeah, no, sorry.
colors.
Yeah, sorry. Palette combinations. And it got me excited. Thank you for correcting me. It got me excited to think about, wonder how many combinations you could get from mushrooms. And I thought that would be a fun study to do, because it's just endless, and how you work with them and what you do and all that sort of stuff. So
have you done any experiments with Lightfastness?
Yeah. So when, all of us who work with what we call wild pigments, these are pigments derived from the natural world. They all have varying degrees of Lightfastness. And I was just with a group, I'm in a show that Tilka Elkins from the Wild Pigment Project organized down in Santa Fe. And we just had an online opening reception the other day. And we were talking about that. Because you do have to become knowledgeable of that, and you have to work with it a certain way. And I loved it because Tilka was talking about how she used pigment derived from blackberry, which is, the blackberries that we eat, and it's a fleeting color and it is going to disappear. But she put another very light fast color right underneath with this idea that it would then reveal. And when we talk about mushroom pigments, there are definitely mushroom pigments that are more light fast than others. When we talk about mushrooms as being a source, organic source of pigment, compared to like soils and ochres and stuff like that. What's super cool about the mushrooms compared to like botanicals, which I work with as well, is some of these mushrooms have the ability, like this mushroom has different tannins in them and different mordants. And so they kind of are more super powerful and makes them even more light fast. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty exciting to kind of play with that and learn what is possible, what's capable. The other thing is when you're working with them, you want to work with them differently. You can use different modifiers. Often when I'm working with fiber and things, I'll do what's called a tannin bath to help preserve it. I'll work with a soy binder. And these kinds of additions that we're doing help make it more light fast. And what's great about making these lakes is I've added, oops,
you
where
can
is
really
it?
see how this is
Yeah.
settled now. Here, yeah. Oh, very cool.
So with these lakes, I added a mordant in there. So I'm adding these different properties that help with the light fastness. Mm-hmm. Because we know, when we look back over time, there's amazing works of art that we're all using natural, wild pigments. Some colors have faded and some haven't. So those are just things that you've got to bring into your skill set, tool set of working with. So let's see, this one that I'm playing with, this is Hydnellum regium. So yeah, I'm happy to take more questions, and I can keep.
Anybody else have any questions? I'm just noticing too that they're not like super granular either. You get some watercolor pigments that are highly granulating, and these, I feel like they're pretty clean.
Yes, and
wash.
you bring up a very great point because there are some mushrooms that are super challenging to work with. They're challenging to lake, and like the Physolithus, like I mentioned, but there's other mushrooms. There's a whole species of mushrooms called the boletes, and the boletes make some really, really beautiful colors. They're really hard to lake. They take days to lake. They've got these incredible spores that are these pores, these tubes, and I don't know, I swear they just like grow crazy in the lake. And then to strain that out and get that granularity out, it can be very challenging. And I mean, I've failed with some of them and I've just given up on them because I'm like, I cannot get this to go on nice and smooth. I can't mull it, my arm's gonna fall off. So it is an interesting process of thinking about, okay, how do the mushrooms respond to this process? And then how do they lend themselves to it? And working with them in wax form to make crayons and things like that is really, really challenging because they are not as soluble in wax as, say, an extract from like a natural dye, like cochineal or something like that, or maybe from an ochre. So you definitely find like, oh, this mushroom isn't really great for this situation. So you're kind of playing with it and so forth. But it does take time. But to me, that's the magic of it all, is that you're working with these wild pigments, these naturally derived, where you're having a connection to that natural world, to that, the fungi kingdom, the mushroom, and, the joy and satisfaction of being able to then create all this from it. So.
And I just love that it's the whole process of getting to go and gather. And
yes,
Trisha's got a question. Not in the US right now, so might have some different species. Are there some things to look out for when foraging mushrooms that suggest they'll lend themselves well to making pigments or to particular methods, like certain characteristics of mushrooms that might be easier than others?
Yes. So one of the things is that not every mushroom out there creates color. They do not all mushrooms have the capability. They don't have those color chemical compounds in them. So if you're familiar with botanicals and plants and things, we're looking at flavonoids and anthocyanins and these sorts of things. These mushrooms have those the way flowers do. And we know that not every flower or plant is going to lend itself to have its color extracted. So you want to narrow in on dye mushrooms. And we've got two great books. We've got Arlene's book, The Rainbow Beneath Your Feet, really narrows in on that, as well as Miriam Rice's notebook. Do I have her book here? I have her book. Show it. Miriam's book as well. So these are great resources to start, to narrow in the species. And then within that, there might be different varieties growing throughout the world. You're going to want to begin to understand the habitats and the trees that are growing in those worlds to know, hey, will tooth fungi be growing in these types of forests? They like to grow with different conifers. So if you're in a forest that doesn't have conifers, your chance of finding them are slimmer. And then within the tooth fungi kingdom, you're specifically looking at, okay, we know hydnellums and sarcodons are going to make color, but not every hydnellum and not every sarcodon will. So you can experiment, you can bring them home, cook them up, make this little dye bath like I did, and see if you get any color and if you're able to extract color. And then you can do some test swatches with it. So you could, put a little binder in and ink it up and see, hey, is it giving me any color or not? So my thing is, you've got to experiment. We also, when we're out in the field, we can use KOH. And of course, I've just forgotten the scientific name of KOH because, I don't know, escaped me. It's not something I necessarily recommend that everyone carry with them because it's highly caustic. You don't want to, spill it on yourself. You'll burn yourself. You get it in your, it's, not a great thing. But if we're really trying to figure out in the field, if this type of mushroom makes a color, we will put a drop of that KOH and it'll have a staining property on the mushroom. And then we can see that it turned color. And that gives us an indicator that, hey, this mushroom has the potential to do color. But that's, mycologists and us that are a little more advanced will do that sort of thing. As a beginner, I recommend that you use your senses to look at these mushrooms. I don't know if you guys can see, but see that blue in this Hydnellum suaveolens? So when you kind of start to see some color, now it doesn't mean that the mushroom is going to create that color, but it's colorful, right? It's not just a white meadow mushroom. Although, you know, there are some, the inky caps that grow along like the edges of roads and things that erode into that beautiful black liquid. Those make gorgeous ink. And they're very light, kind of whitish gray. So there's a mushroom that's light that makes color. So they do exist, but it's definitely just spending time, resources. Again, I put the mushroom color atlas up there because believe it or not, even though a lot of those mushrooms are from my area, and I hope to add mushrooms from other areas that I get to or am able to do a trade and a gift and exchange with people who might have different species and varieties. In general, these species of mushrooms kind of grow all throughout the world. Even like down in Costa Rica, we're going to have certain species of mushrooms growing there, but they're a different variety. And so if you can kind of hone in on those types of mushrooms, and in the Mushroom Color Atlas, I have an index section that kind of organizes it by type, and that can help you get along your way as well. So
it looks like we've got a few more questions, Julie.
Yes.
So one was looking at the lake, how long it should sit, like what you're looking for before you start straining it. Like as this has been sitting for the past 45 minutes or so, or half hour.
I want this liquid at the top. See how it's darker down here and it's lighter up here? I want that to be clear. And once all that color has settled to the bottom, then I know I'm ready to lake it. Now, it's never going to be 100% clear like fresh water, but it's going to be pretty clear. If you find that your lake, you've had it sitting there for 3 days, I don't know, 2 days, whatever it is, and it's still got color in the top, it just means that you didn't add enough alum and you didn't add enough soda ash to collect that color. And so you can pour that liquid off and re-lake it to grab even more color. And I've had to do that as I've learned to work with some of these tooth fungi here, these little guys, that cute little blue one. Oops, that way. There we go. The first few times I laked it, I couldn't get clear liquid. And so then I relaked it, and I realized that dye bath is a highly alkaline dye bath. That's how you coax the color out. The pH has to be at 9. And so I wasn't putting enough alum in to neutralize it. And so then I figured out like, oh, for those mushrooms, it's not exactly 10 grams per liter. I need to do more around not quite 20. So I do 15, 17, 18 grams. And then I was able to get clear liquid, but the clear liquid is the key. And then you'll know you're ready to strain it off.
And Lisa has a great question. Do any grocery store mushrooms create any fun colors that you know of?
Yes. Well, okay. So I have to rephrase that. Grocery store mushrooms, it depends on your grocery store. If you're at a grocery store that sells wild foraged mushrooms, often you'll find this lobster mushroom. And you might find it at farmers markets. And this lobster mushroom creates these beautiful ranges of color here. And I've got some down here. So you can definitely like go to the grocery store and buy them. But your oyster mushrooms, your shiitake mushrooms, your button, you know, the portobellas and things, those don't make color. There aren't that many edible mushrooms that make color. There are some, Polyozellis, multiplex, the variety of blue chanterelles, those make color as well. People do like to eat those. So there's some, but not a lot.
Well, this ties right into our next question.
Yes.
Which is, are any of the mushrooms used for pigments, these pigments, poisonous?
So, yes, I think it determine. Okay, so how you define poisonous? So when I think of poisonous, it's like toxic and it's going to kill you. And then there's toxic mushrooms that are maybe going to damage your liver or your kidneys. You're going to have significant issues from them, but you might not die, but you definitely don't want those issues. And then there's mushrooms that you might consider toxic that give you really incredible gastrointestinal problems that could last weeks. The answer is yes. Some of these mushrooms you do not, they are toxic in that sense. None of these particularly are poisonous in terms of being deadly. And that is why if you're working with it, you want to have, these jars and coffee grinders and things I'm using, my stir sticks, whatever. Those are never anything I'm going to bring into my kitchen to make my food with and cook with. The main thing you want to make sure you never do is that you never ingest them. And that means I have a good friend, Dr. Michael Bug, who lives in my community, who's a well-known mycologist. And he's always, Julie, you can taste every mushroom. You can put any mushroom you want in your mouth, including the amanitas, whatever. He's like, they might be super peppery and hot and you'll be on fire for 2 days, but you can do it as long as you don't swallow it. You don't ingest it. If you spit it all out. And he can't get me to do that with these mushrooms yet, but I believe him. The biggest thing is you don't want to ingest them. So if I'm working with the mushrooms, I don't always wear gloves, but I'm going to wash my hands and all that sort of stuff before I go, eat my lunch. When I am grinding my mushrooms or I'm working with any of these powders, I do wear a mask. I was doing that well before COVID. It's just, I don't want those thin little particles in my system. There's no reason for them. And they're not going to do anything to me, but I might get a sinus infection or something. So you can definitely work with all these. You just need to take a few precautions and just make sure that, you're working with them safely and smartly.
And a question about kind of their watercolor characteristics of how they work wet in wet. It kind of makes me wonder, oh, look, you're comparing a nice wet spot, so we might be able to see that.
Yeah, I can do that. I was going to do it with, what color haven't I done yet? Oh, I haven't used Indian. This one, I did this in a class and then I scooped up the watercolor. So it's all in chunks. I couldn't let what was on the glass plate go to waste. So I let it dry and put it in your palette. So it's it wasn't, but we'll get that going. So you can put them in here. I gotta get it more.
Load up a little more pigment.
I know takes a second to get it wet, but this is the Indian pink fungus. So you can see it can work with.
Yeah, you're getting some of those soft edges.
Yep, exactly. And then where it's more dry.
I saw another question about when you're making the lakes.
Yeah.
If you can speed it up in an Instapot. Have you tried anything to expedite your process?
I have not. That is a very good idea, but it makes me nervous because there's a few things that I'm very particular about, and this is just me and my way, and you do not need to be like this at all, but I am always very concerned about temperature. And I am someone that is into low and slow. So I think that whoever asked that question, I would love for you to experiment with an Instapot. I could do it with a mushroom I have a lot of, but some of my precious babies, I'm going to baby them and I'm not going to use an Instapot because I'm just afraid of the heat. And a good example of that is this mushroom. Let me show it real quick. So this is the Cortinarius pigment here. So I don't know. There we go. So it's this dark red, and this is the watercolor here. And this is what happens when you ink that color. You kind of see the difference. You get so much more pigment versus when I warm Cortinarius up, which does not like to get hot. But when I made it hot, I'm just getting this super kind of, I don't know, lighty, pinky, beigey blah. That's not my favorite. And I did this as kind of a test and a learning moment in some of my workshops, that this particular mushroom, if you heat it up too hot, it browns out or zaps the color, whatever term you want to use, And I am always nervous about that, because if I've spent a lot of time trying to collect all these babies, even though this is a gargantuan baby, I don't want to have that happen. But I did a little test as a demonstration. So for example, I would never put Cortinarius in a pressure cooker, because I know I'm going to lose the color because the temperature is just going to get too hot. Versus Physolithus probably would be happy. Phaeolus would probably be happy. So there probably would be some mushrooms that would be happy in that situation. I just have never done it.
Well, Julie, our time has just flown by.
Oh,
And
it
I
has.
think
Okay.
kind of one last question that I think
Yes,
would be
and
great
I'm going to get my
if you
ink
could
out.
take a minute to describe. And that was a question here from MR Cohen of kind of describing how after in the filter, what you take from the filter, your process then for mulling it into the watercolor. If you could describe that a little bit more, your process.
Yeah. So what I'm doing with that filter is this is the Physolithus ink. I just wanted to show how that goes down. Anyways, okay. So I take this guy here. So that's what's in the filter. It's these chunks. And I use a paint scraper and I scrape it all off the filter. I get every last little piece. I do it. I have a little piece of vellum just because for my arts practice, I draw on vellum to transfer my drawings. And so I just have some extra sitting around. I have that underneath. I then brush it all in using a little funnel, because again, I want to make sure I get every last little speck. And I funnel it into my coffee grinder, and then I grind it in the coffee grinder. And then from there, I have a brush. I clean out my coffee grinder with my brush, again, into another little funnel. And I store it in my vials. I brought all these vials as display vials, but I have some jars that are more like this size that my water's in now. And I'll store it in there. And before I start to work with it and turn it into actual paint, I then put it in a mortar and pestle and I grind it to try to get it even finer. And then once I have that finely ground pigment, I have a glass plate that I've etched. So that glass plate has an etching in it, so it has some friction with the muller. And I put out my pigment. I put some of my binder in. I try to start 1-to-1, like in terms of the amount of pigment to the amount of binder, and then use a knife and kind of mix it together and then mull it from there. And Maria and I were talking earlier, when I'm mulling my paint, it's always a challenge, and especially with mushrooms, to figure out the correct amount of binder to pigment. And I'm really, just because I've done it a lot, I'm experimenting and I can see the consistency I need. These little guys, this pigment here, this tooth fungi, they're highly alkaline and they just suck up that binder like crazy. And so they need like double, like 2 to 2.5 times the amount of, say, a mushroom pigment like Phaeolus, this guy here, who's just really neutral at this point and is happy, and it's just kind of 1-to-1 and they're nice and smooth. So it depends how much pigment. And some of these I've done well, some have cracked. It means they don't have enough binder in them, but that's that. So I don't know. And
wow, and this desk here of just all these amazing colors.
Yes, all of our little colors.
Well,
but...
I'm in awe, Julie, and coming back to these
of
just like this rainbow that you can create with these wild pigments. I think it's just remarkable as someone who loves color. And I really want to thank you for coming and sharing your enthusiasms and your passions. And this is a whole new world to me, and feel energized
to go
learn more about it.
You can go find some tooth fungi and some Phaeolus and all kinds of things.
And I want to thank everyone who's joined us here and in our Art Toolkit studio and been patient with a little bit of our tech. Thank you.
Thank you.
But we hope that you keep in touch. And Julie, can you mention where people can follow your work online?
Yeah. So the website's the mushroomcoloratlas.com, and on Instagram, it's Mushroom Color Atlas. And then my work and studio and flower farm is Bloom and Dye, DYE, .com, and then Bloom and Dye on Instagram. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm so excited. There's so much interest in these wild pigments that are derived from the fungi kingdom. So I hope it's inspired you to get out in the forest and connect to nature and think about our relationship to that world and become great stewards of our environment.
If any of you do go out and create your own pigments, tag us and let us know what you've made. We'd love to hear your experiences. And Julie, sounds like people want you back for demonstrating the full mulling.
Oh, I could do the full mulling process.
Well,
That needs to be a little bit longer. It might need to be a workshop because, you know, sometimes it can take, you know, a half hour to an hour to mull some of the paint and stuff. But yeah, and you know, there's a lot of people that are mulling with pigments and so forth, and all pigments are unique, and so mushrooms have their own little characteristics and qualities, but you guys should start and play with it.
Oh, there's so much to learn. Well, we hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone. Julie, I hope you have a fabulous symposium.
Yes,
and
so excited.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch.
Thank you. Is it okay?
Sorry about the overhead there.